Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the session entitled Intergenerational Leadership in the Boardroom. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far and had lots of insightful discussions and impersonal exchanges during this year's 53rd St. Gallen Symposium. My name is Charlotte Weishaupt and I'm part of the International Students Committee team. Since last September, I'm responsible for our Swiss market, for our companies, especially in the legal and finance sector. I'm also part of the services team of this year's 53rd St. Gallen Symposium. Besides my current engagement in the International Students Committee, I'm in my 6th semester of business administration here at the University of St. Gallen. Each year, the Nuremberg Institute for Market Decision, together with the St. Gallen Symposium, publishes the so-called Leaders of Tomorrow report. This report provides exclusive insights into the perspective of this year's Leaders of Tomorrow and encompasses interviews of senior leaders from our global community on this year's topic of scarcity. According to the report, both the leaders of today and tomorrow agree that intergenerational leadership should play a key role in the future management of sustainable companies. But the question is, are the leaders of today ready to hand over the responsibility to us, the young generation? The leaders of tomorrow believe there's a big difference between how ready they are to take on the responsibility and how willing today's leaders are to let them. However, both groups, the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow, agree that effective intergenerational or cross-generational leadership needs formats like roundtables, discussions, or mentoring programs or advisory boards where young employees advise the executive board. With this in mind, I'm looking very forward to this discussion with you and the insightful also Q&A afterwards. Now I'm honored to welcome you, Mr. Reeves, as the topic leader of this session. Martin Reeves is the chairman of the BCG Henderson Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you for framing our discussion. So let me first introduce our panel who's going to discuss this topic that's very core to St. Gallen, increasing the voice of youth in leadership and society. I think we've got a very well qualified panel to do that. So we have, first of all, a champion of youth in a sense, Felipe Paullier, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs at the United Nations. He's also been an assistant mayor, so he's worked in leadership roles in the public sector, so welcome to you.
Good afternoon.
And then we have a mover and shaker in the world of corporate governance in the form of Clara Streit. And she's actually the chair of the Government Commission on German Corporate Governance. So it's right at the center of our question. How should we govern ourselves? So we'll be hearing her about how we think that we can inject the voice of youth into that. She's also a practitioner leader in the sense that she sits on numerous boards, more than I can fit on my crib sheet here, in different countries and companies. Then we have a veteran leader in the form of Christoph Loos. So he was the CEO and is now the chairman of Hilti, a company we all recognize. Spent many years on the executive board, but also now the supervisory board, I believe. So both key leadership roles in a company. And then we have Alex Senn from Siemens, Smart Infrastructure, who is head of people and organization, or some people might know it as HR. So he's really an expert on the processes of promotion and development, career development, which are the mechanics of how we accelerate and amplify the voice of youth in leadership. So to give something for us to, maybe a straw man for us to react to, let me share a perspective, which we absolutely don't agree on as a panel, but in a way that's what's going to make it interesting. So I think businesses have always had two jobs. They have to look after their current business and create returns for shareholders, but they also have to invent the future. And there are many reasons, of course, why they have to invent the future. We need to solve problems like sustainability and interest rates and the rapid decay of competitive advantage. And it's commonly said that if we want new ideas, we sometimes have to have new people. We have to have people from outside of our companies, people from diverse backgrounds, and people from perhaps different age brackets that have different time horizons to deal with the future. Now, the facilitator of the session, she mentioned some statistics, some interesting statistics from the St. Gallen study that's on the tables dotted around the building here. There's a very interesting survey of, I think, 900 experienced and young executives, and they all agree very substantially, about 80% in both cases, the young and the not so young. They all agree that we need to increase the voice of and the role and the influence of youth in leadership. But she referred to another statistic, but shouldn't give the numbers, which is only 25% of the younger leaders believe that the older leaders are prepared to honor their public words. Only 25% believe in the sincerity of the sentiment to actively promote youth in leadership. So that's a perception. Maybe that's an eternal perception. But actually, we have some statistics to say that maybe there are some reasons why this 25% is 25%. So one of the pieces of research we do every year is we look at the growth prospects, the so-called vitality, the future growth prospects of all public corporations worldwide. And when we look at those statistics, we see two things. We see that the companies with aging leadership, very high average age for their leading positions, on average have lower vitality. Now, that's not to say that every 60-year-old leader is unimaginative or that every 30-year-old leader is highly creative. Of course, that would be stereotyping, that would be ageism. But on average, youthful leadership teams have higher growth potential. We see another interesting statistic, which is if you take the entire Fortune 500 over a period of years, of 20 years in fact, that the average age of CEOs has gone from being 46 to 55 years old. That's a very dramatic increase. That's an increase in the average. So maybe there are some good reasons why youth is skeptical about this commitment to their influence. And of course, we could point to the same trend in politics. I mean, the candidates for the U.S. presidential election currently are 81 and 77 years old, respectively. So is this a general phenomenon, or is this just a blip in a statistical blip? Well, we'll discuss that. So last year, we and St. Gallen got together to write a piece that was published in Harvard's Business Review on the idea of assuming that we do need to increase the representation of youth in leadership. How could we do so? What are the mechanisms to do so? And one can imagine all sorts of different mechanisms. We could imagine term limits, for example, or we could imagine as in some places in the world, we have a minimum quotients of diversity for senior positions, or many other mechanisms. We'll be getting into that too. So this is the straw man. So stated briefly, the straw man is that to cope with the future, to build the future, we need youthful minds. We also need experience, but we need a good mix of experience and curiosity. That mix is deteriorating a little, and we need some active mechanisms to promote the acceleration of youth into leadership positions. So let me first kick off by asking the panel for a general reaction to this straw man. So Felipe, does this seem reasonable to you?
So first of all, I would like to thank all the students that have been working for this to happen. And I think it's amazing to see them everywhere and always with a smile and putting a lot of care in taking everything to make this an excellent symposium for all of us. So trying to think about this and specifically on my personal experience and my role now in the United Nations. So our whole role, our team, I have the responsibility of leading a newly established initiative of the General Assembly. So an initiative that has a political support of the countries that are part of the UN, which is about shifting this intergenerational disbalance we have in institutions and, in my case, in the United Nations system. But considering myself that I'm not the regular profile of a senior leader in the organization, not only because of my age, but because of my personal background. I'm not a diplomat. I'm really new in the UN. It's only 5 months since I joined this organization. I'm a medical doctor by training. So when I started at this role and understanding this issue, which is in somehow kind of the treatment we should try in the organization, I tried thinking about what's the diagnosis, no? Because that's the first step any medical doctor will do in any situation, no? Trying to understand the different symptoms and how to bring them together into a common diagnosis. And that's the first step, because if you fail on the diagnosis, then you will fail on the treatment and on the prescription, which is the how, no? But thinking about the why, I strongly believe that we are in a critical moment for institutions, not only for public institutions, but also for private sector, in the matter of trust. And specifically when it's about of young people, this is a crucial issue. And when I think about the UN itself, I think it was a very smart decision from countries to establish a mechanism to try to transform this situation. Because the whole UN system is based on trust. So if people don't trust in the UN, how the UN is going to be promoting peace or protecting citizens? How the UN is going to be promoting a sustainable development agenda if people don't trust in the UN? How we are going to be protecting human rights? So this essence of this intergenerational disbalance and how we create mechanisms for meaningful youth engagement, for me is a crucial essence if we want to address this issue about trust. And this, I think, it's something that comes also to the private sector. So I strongly believe that creating mechanisms for this to happen, which will be extremely diverse, because there's not a common recipe in how to do this. No? It's not the same for the private sector, it's not the same for the public institutions, it's not the same for a multilateral organization. But being able to understand the why and why this is crucial, for me, that's essential. No? And I will believe that to start this conversation, I will try to focus on that.
Great, and we're going to get into how in a short time, but moving to Clara, your general reaction to the straw man?
Yeah, and I would like to react to what Felipe said. I think that resonates a lot with me. In governance, also in the private sector, trust is really what it centers around, and both in the formal fiduciary duties, but also in making organizations more effective in the long term and for all stakeholders. If you take that, then I think it is without question, and it's been proven over and over, that at the core is really decision-making. Decision-making is of higher quality if it has an appropriate level of diversity in the decision-making process. And obviously, age as one element of diversity is one important factor. Now, and I just leave that at that stage so that you can get a bit upset with me. Diversity is not l'art pour l'art, and not not there for its own good or right, and therefore what kind of diversity you have at what kind of formal decision-making or informal decision-making is a question that every institution, be it public sector or private sector, needs to figure out and spend time about it.
Right. So you're saying that there's a diversity of decision-making that needs to occur, but it's not for its own sake. It's for the sake of efficacy, is it? Did I get that right, Clara?
For the sake of better decision-making, more sustainable, more successful decision-making in the long term.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Christoph, your reaction to this straw man?
I probably agree from what I can overlook that there is a tendency to weigh experience stronger again in the environment that we're in and maybe avoid risk. And therefore this age statistic that you mentioned resonates. I struggle a bit with that other, vitality correlation that you mentioned, that, more experienced leadership teams lead to less vitality in boards. I also see a lot of very vital, very innovative, very forward-thinking tenured teams. But I have to say, I still very much support that overall notion that we have to, in society, in politics, in companies, bring younger people earlier into leadership roles for the reasons that you mentioned. It's well proven that more diverse teams are leading to better results, gender, but that's, I'm sure, also for age. But I also have to say, out of a lot of own experience, and that's also well researched, that's only true if there's a very inclusive environment, if people want diversity, if people accept the pain also of diversity, because it's painful to have a very diverse team and lots of opinions, etc., and if there is a lot of strong leadership. And therefore, in principle, I agree that. But I have to say, it's not la pour la. It's much easier said than done. And quality of leadership teams beat clearly diversity.
Right. So I think we're all agreeing that the formalism of diversity of age wouldn't be worth as much as getting the culture right, getting the effective decision-making right. Alex, you're in the business of people. I'm sure this is a very practical day-to-day issue for you. What's your perspective on the straw man?
Let me try. I'm not a doctor and also not by training, but let me try to do a diagnosis. What I believe the problem is, because I would like to very much agree what you all have said, but I believe there are two main reasons for where we are in right now. First and foremost, I think we don't create enough opportunities for younger leaders to grow and to gain the experience they need to get up to the board one day, because leaders want to stay in their positions, because we don't give them a way out. Sometimes I talk to leaders and they would like to do something different, but it's not accepted to step down, to have less responsibility. So this is a problem. People stay too long in their positions, and this is not good, not for the people and not good for the organization, because I strongly believe every function, every job need from time to time a new impulse, and new people bring new impulses. So that's why we don't create the opportunities for younger leader, and then sometimes, in some areas, you can take risk. I would not now like to take a risk on a managing board position, because looking at Siemens, I mean, we're dealing with a global company, over 300,000 people. Our products, I mean, we save life, but it could also go the other way around. So that's why it's really crucial to have people who know their function, their expertise, etc. Having said that, what we need to do is allow the fast tracks for the really talented people with potential. I believe maybe in there are people that will get up to the board one day, but we need to give them the experience they need on the way up there. So this is something, maybe please, one big to the younger leaders, be bold, yes, but also be eager to learn. And think about what need, because yes, you can have a cool job, you can have a high salary, and you have responsibility, but with responsibility, it's also, there is pressure on you, and you need to have you need to take the accountability for yourself.
So what you said there was very interesting, Alex, and we were chatting about it beforehand. We said that we need, in high growth times, we may have an escalator because we constantly need talent. In slower growth times, we need more of an elevator, something that can go up and down. So what are you doing in Siemens about this problem of having it be a natural and a normal thing for leaders to step down when appropriate?
We're not there yet, but I'm in my position. I can push the people, and I push the people, and we push the people. Matthias, Axel as a CFO, etc. And we actively give people opportunities or tell them, hey, now you need to move on. So this is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We don't have now, we're talking 5 years, etc. But maybe this is a solution. We can think about it, right? That whenever someone accepts a job, you say, this job is for the next 5 years, but then you have to move on. But maybe you have a better solution now. We don't have it right now.
So in a way, we've spoken theoretically about, do we want this thing? We've said yes, with a few caveats. So let's get into the practicalities. Each of you is an experienced operator. So maybe starting with you, Alex, tell us about a specific scheme or a specific program you have for solving this problem of maintaining youthful or diverse leadership. What are you trying to do?
So what we definitely have, we have 4 strategic priorities, and one of them is growth mindset. And this is at the center of everything. So we're really expecting for our people to learn, to leave their comfort zone, to get into a stretch position, to learn on the job, on trainings, etc. And then we bring the different generations together, and here learning happens, because I learn from young people but also young people learn maybe from me. I'm turning 50 next year. So that's why this is, I think, the beauty when you bring people together in these training formats, etc. This is one thing, and the other one is reverse mentoring. This is definitely well accepted and super cool, I have to say, right? I learn so much. I learn from my children, but I also learn day by day from younger people I'm in contact with. And I think we should keep that. And what I like what you said, it's not a question of age. I see 60 years old, they're curious, they want to learn. And I see 30 years old, they think they have learned everything and they want to become the next CEO. So this is my key message. Don't stop, be curious and learning. There's always, you will never be on a 10 in a scale when it comes to leadership or skills. You will never get to a 10. You constantly need to learn, to reflect, and to see where are the opportunities, the learning opportunities.
Very good. Christoph, in practice, how have you attacked this this necessary turnover in leadership and making sure that you have an elevator and not an escalator?
We're very structured around people development, and we have a lot of programs where we have pools and identify our future stars, and we have fast track mechanisms, and we have mentoring, and that we do, and with that you develop young leaders into leadership positions. You need young leaders that are willing to be fast tracked. That's actually a painful thing. I've been the product of that myself. I became an executive board member at the age of 38. And the years before, someone decided that they want to fast-track me, and then I had, lots of roles. It was very stressful. It came with a lot of pressure. It came with a lot of geographic mobility. It's not the walk in the park where you're a young person and you say, I would like to take on a leadership role. So we have programs for that, but what's maybe more important is you need to really want it. You need to have a courage for it. If you develop people on a fast track and give them too big roles too early, you also have to accept that they're not perfect on day one. So you need to have a culture to then accept that and have a culture where then whoever sits on top of you and supports you sits with you in the boat, and accepts that you're not perfect on day one, mentors you, coaches you, helps you. Of course, as a young person, you have to grow. If you don't live up to that expectation, you're out, that's clear. But you need to have leaders around you that go with you through that development. So that is important. And then you need, when you bring young leaders into leadership roles, you need to accept that they challenge, that you get all the benefits of it, challenging past decisions, more modern, less hierarchy, closer to the organization, more realism in the boardroom, all good. But it's also painful for the boardroom because, lots of things are being challenged that the old team may have agreed on many times already. And if you have an environment where that's not wanted and a leader that does not support that, then this odd diversity person, be it a woman or a young guy or whoever, dies. And so that the program, I see, many companies can do better there, and also we can grow. But this environment where you want it and accept that there is no free lunch, that this comes also with some pain. That's maybe the more challenging.
Let me ask you about a thought that occurred to me as you were saying those things about your experience, which is, in a way, promoting youth into leadership, and the title of this session is specifically the boardroom.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is based on the assumption that all of the decision-making takes place at the top. And historically, that's the case, and obviously there's a substantial element of truth in that. But some people would say that we need organizations where decision-making is more devolved. And some people would even claim that in some companies it already is very devolved. So in a sense, we don't need to be on the board to have tremendous leadership influence. How do you react to that?
Absolutely agree. And my comments, and actually that's also how I understand the topic, is not only the boardroom, it's a leadership team. In our company, it could also be a leadership team of our team in France. That's 1,000 people, and you have a leadership team. Now you can have old 60-year-old white men, or you can have a diverse leadership team. That's not yet the board. There's 2-3 levels in between, but the same applies there. And then you can even go further down.
Mm. So Clara, tell us about your specific practical experience of dealing with this question. You said you support this this cause, but with caveats that it has to work, it has to be effective, and so I guess you have two unique vantage points. One of them is doing it as a director in various companies, and the other is in setting governance standards. How does this look like to you as a practical issue?
Thank you, Martin. And I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit of a party pooper here, but that's okay. I'm also the diversity woman here, so maybe I come with a bit of an advantage, so I can now say some less popular things. And so, indeed, I think if you know, it is true, and it's perfectly appropriate and the right thing in today's world to have much more distributed decision-making in companies and institutions, so no question about that. There are still matters that are at the final board, and for good reasons. And if you follow the idea that real change happens only if it starts at the very top, then you, on this matter, have to ask yourself, how far can we go on this matter on the last final board, where the buck stops, you know? And there I have to say, both as a practitioner and as a standard setter, I struggle to some extent because, and why is that? As a standard setter, I am a big fan of principles instead of rules. I like the principle of diversity, and because of the quality of decision-making, I am, and we still have a provision in the code that is my least favorite one, or among my least favorite ones, which has an element of age discrimination in there. Not directly, but indirectly. It's something I don't like.
What does that say, roughly speaking?
It stipulates that companies, in their own rules of procedure, should have an age limit for directors. No, they can set it at 105, and then it doesn't have a, you know, they're still complying with the code. It's not in practice what companies do. I don't like it because I don't think it's appropriate for a standard setter as a matter of principle to, you know, go in that direction. But that's a separate question. As a chairperson, I do, and an independent director, I do think that, you know, if you're a very large board, you can have experts. You know, you can have experts on cyber, you can have an expert on China, you can have an expert on young people, or if you have a lot of young clients, that makes all sense of the world. If you have very long-term issues, that makes all sense of the world. But you need, in any board, and in particular in smaller boards, but in any board, you need people, and that needs to be the body of the church, that has a very large amount of pattern recognition. Now, I struggle with the idea of how can you get to pattern recognition without time, unfortunately. So again, it's actually easier. You know, you have women who have as much pattern recognition as men, so that's easier. But what do I mean with pattern recognition in practical terms? You know, awful things happen at companies. A chairman passes away, CEO moves to the main competitor. You have an activist investor with a good or a bad cause. You have a huge compliance scandal. All these things, even as an executive, we were just chatting about it, normally you see in 10 years as a CEO, you see maximum one of each, if at all. Nowadays, boards and leaderships of boards have seen and ought to have seen these several times, because every situation is, those situations for the long-term sustainability of the company and its 10,000, 100,000, 300,000 employees are critical importance. And I struggle with the idea, how can I find it would be very unusual. It needs to be the Mozart of governance who has seen that at 28, you know? And so it's all very nice what we're saying, and I see it, but if you come to the top of the church, I am struggling a bit, and I would be interested, maybe you guys have better ideas. So while I support the cause in principle, if you ask me, would I impose a rule like that as a standard setter, or would I do it as a chairman? I'm not so sure.
So in a way, this point of view begs another question then, which is, if you need that experience, how do you prepare the next set of people with that experience? So let's say that it's true that younger leaders, let's say, 35-year-old leaders, are not in general qualified by experience to do the difficult governance jobs, but we need to prepare them to be so. Do we need to accelerate some of those preparatory mechanisms? And what have you seen about that?
Yeah, and there you have the two mechanisms. You have executives that grow faster, and that, like Christoph, you are already an accomplished CEO and have learned as a chairman by the age of 50 and a bit, where, the generation before us, the chairmen were all 65 plus. We remember that when we were, so there is already a change in that. The other thing is you have careers, you have these expertise-based roles, and I think their acceleration through academics, through professional services jobs, others, help. And I think increasingly you have what you had in the Anglo-Saxon sphere earlier than like here in continental Europe, careers as non-executive directors, which also prepare you earlier on, where you basically learn as a non-executive director, and you start doing that as a 40 or 40-bit old, and then at the age of 50, you have had those 10 years that you probably need to have seen it almost all at least once.
Thank you. So Felipe, tell us about a specific program. You have the entire world as your scope, so you probably have to be very selective. I'm sure you thought about where can you be most strategic in promoting the cause of young leadership. How have you thought about how to target your interventions?
Of course. But before getting into this, let me disagree a little bit about kind of the discussion we're having. I think that in somehow we're having a bit of a paternalistic approach of young people, no? We, the senior leadership, need to explain young people how they need to bring into the governance of the organization. And I really believe that was maybe okay 10, 15 years ago. But the world has dramatically changed in a very fast way. And we cannot continue to have institutions or structures that respond to a different logic than the one we are living. So that's why we need like elevators, no? And we need some disruption. And of course, disruption comes with risk. And when we're about like bringing young people into the leadership in the boardroom, it's not about selecting any young person, no? It's, of course, there's a competitive process. I had to go into that process when I was appointed and selected to be. And the panel that interviewed me and selected me, I think they were a little bit risky because they don't only choose someone under 35, but also someone that is external of the organization and that comes from a different background. So getting into your specific question, what we are trying to do, because I think it's a try, and I hope that in a few years we can have again this conversation and I can be optimistic about the results and the challenges we're facing. And I hope it's not for a long time, because I don't want to be the Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs when I'm old. I hope it's for a short term, and I think that's something good, because when you're for a short term in some specific leadership position, then you are able to be a bit more disruptive, and definitely something which is about creating mechanisms for meaningful engagement needs to be disruptive, more in a big bureaucracy such as the UN. No? The UN is a big bureaucracy, and that doesn't is necessarily something bad, because it's a bureaucracy, because it needs to be accountable to the member states and the countries that put the money in the organization. That's here, being in a business school, I'm sure we all have studied about, I did in my MBA program about the mechanisms of control, no? So bureaucracies itself are not something bad, no? But what can we do to transform it? And yes, we're putting a lot of focus in understanding that our adding value as a team in the organization and as an office, it's about creating this transformation inside the system. So the United Nations Youth Office is not about creating a whole series of programs and mechanisms at the side of the system that has to do with young people. No? The UN is a big system, and there are already a lot of agencies such as WHO working on health issues, UNICEF working on protecting child, UNFPA working on protecting health and sexual reproductive health. So our role, our adding value in the system, is how we accelerate this meaningful engagement strategy. No? And for that, we have identified 3 main tracks. One track is working with the UN system. So it's like all our agencies that are executing programs, it's that they have a common framework in how to do it in their own way, because it's not the same to establish a meaningful engagement mechanism in South Africa than in Uruguay, which is my home country.
And how formally do you do that? Do you do that with rules and quotas or term limits, or what is the mechanism?
So in this specific track, we have a strategy. It's been 5 years now. We are reviewing this strategy. One of the most important steps we did is creating an accountability system, and we developed a scorecard with 17 KPIs, which is about different things that each of the agencies should be doing to have a more meaningful engagement approach. And we make that information public, and we publish it in a web page, and it's accessible to everyone. And you can see how UNICEF, how UNFPA are doing, how all of the UN country teams are doing in each country about this. So of course, it's about creating accountability also. But that's one track. One track is internal, and it's how we transform the leadership in the organization. So I'm here, I'm the youngest in this panel, and you may say, wow, the UN is very innovative and is doing very good. It's not true. I'm the only one in the senior level position at this age. Our average age at the Assistant Secretary General, which is my position, is 60 years old. So it's quite similar to the CEOs in companies. So how we transform that, I believe it's one step at a time. So we are working, for example, creating a whole space for fair internships in the organizations. In the UN now, we have big entities where internships are unpaid, and that creates a very specific and complexity to young people that come from countries from the global south, because how we are going to, and it's even more important when it's about working in the headquarters of the organization, what young person from the global south can be able to manage to maintain themselves during an internship experience. That creates a whole gap of representation, and the UN needs to be that. And maybe the most challenge, and I finalize with this, is how we work in the intergovernmental discussions in this. And that's the most challenging, because that's where you have 193 different governments, and of course different understanding of what it's meaningful engagement, why this is important to do it, no? But that's essential, because at the end, the UN is an intergovernmental body. It's not about the international civil servants, such as my case. It's about what happens there and what commitments have governments, no? And on that side, this year, the UN is taking a whole process. It's called the Summit of the Future, but it's not about what is happening in September, which is the end of this process. It's about the negotiations countries are taking part during these months, and there's a specific chapter on youth, and we are focusing a lot in that there are concrete commitments on mechanisms for meaningful engagement inside the organization.
Right. Clara, let me ask you about the shareholders, the money side of this, because in a sense we've been saying is, would it be nice to have youth in leadership? We've said, what are some of the practical challenges from an operational perspective, the experience requirements? But do the shareholders buy this? Are the shareholders demanding this? Would the shareholders accept this proposition we're discussing today? How does this intersect with the money?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think obviously for us shareholders, for us in my role, shareholders are the most important stakeholder that we also interact with. There's not the one shareholder. You have a very broad base of interest. I would say if you take the classic long-term oriented, long holder shareholders, they do have requirements nowadays regarding diversity, and they ask about that. They are quite keen also to understand age composition of boards. So we are asked to make sure that we have both a sufficient diversity of age, but also an age average that is sustainable, and shareholders do value, and in that, younger boards, I think in taking with your analysis as well, Martin. But we're talking about coming from like 60 to 50. It's something they appreciate. And then succession planning, that is of course a key topic for investors, for companies, but also for the investors. That is particularly important, obviously, for the executive career and management ranks, but it's also important as regards the board and non-executives. And they want to understand how we think about succession planning, and taking into account the needs that you have in diversity in backgrounds, always coupled, obviously, with the strategic needs of the company. Yes, investors ask for it. That said, for them, of course, the most important is that they have the best qualified board for the situation, in their opinion. Their opinions differ. And as I mentioned before, pattern recognition and making sure you're doing well on the challenging strategically, board strategically, but also managing downside risk and then ensuring proper succession. Those are probably the three most important questions they ask. Yeah.
So in a way, we've described the status quo, and not surprising, we're all doing different things against this issue. There's a lot of effort. But nevertheless, this aging of the leadership demographic is a fact. So let's suppose that somehow we need more than incremental efforts, more than best efforts of the things that we've talked about. I mean, there are different structural alternatives we can think about, right? We can think about pushing more term limits in senior positions in companies. We can think about making governance rules or principles more explicit on this topic. We could think about consultative bodies. Maybe the youth are not on the board of the company, but they could be consulted in some structural way. There are different sort of structural alternatives where we could go beyond the incremental efforts. Any ideas, Alex, on structural moves that would help us to accelerate this process?
Yeah, I'll come to that in a minute, but just let me elaborate a little bit what we're doing in succession planning. I think this is, so we set ourselves targets, diversity targets on the succession plans. We have development plans for these people on succession plans. So there's a plan, right? There's a plan for the talents where they can grow into. So this is important. And then maybe we need to create the opportunities, coming back what I've said before. And yes, maybe we need to think about terms in a job, etc. I think this is the solution. And most probably, I don't know, this is maybe the next step we need to take. Today is the approach to discuss with the people, because they're still in our company and we need them, and they're very valuable, and they did a lot for our company. So we also don't want to discriminate some of our people, because our success today is also because of them. We are people. We are an engineering company, but it's all about the people. So you need to be very careful what you're doing and the message you're sending out, because otherwise that will have an impact on the employee engagement, and this is not good, right? Mm-hmm. We need to perform today and tomorrow. So I don't have the solution. I'm a big fan of making people aware of the situation, give them a way out, pool of senior leaders, etc., who can then consult, mentor younger leaders, etc., something like that. I think this is more the approach we're thinking right now at the moment. But at the end of the day, yes, I believe a big believer in KPIs, not in quota, but KPIs. And let me elaborate a little bit on what we do. And it's diversity is much more than age. It's nationalities, it's personality, it's gender, etc. So we give ourselves targets. But please, do not set stupid targets. We only look at the market. What is the market telling us? What is for example, the percentage of female in a specific job family? So you need to segment your workforce, and then to give yourself targets that is really then maybe better than hiring better than the market, right? What do we have? Hiring better than the market. So when, I don't know, in certain job family, the market says 30% female are available, right? Then we hire more than 30% of females. So this is how we approach. So please don't set stupid targets or targets. They're totally far away, because at the end of the day, the best person should get the job, and not only because of age or gender or nationalities.
Christoph, what do you think the non-incremental moves are here, and the structural moves, as it were?
I'm a big believer in 10-year rules. We have them in Hilti. I needed to step down as a CEO at the age of 54, because I've been 16 years on the board, and then we have 12 to 15, and then you have to step
And that's
down.
not an age rule, that's a
10-year
years
rule.
in position.
And that's my point. I believe a 10-year rule, I'm against regulation to start with. That's something that a company should actually organize for themselves. And I'm also the chairman of a German listed company, so we had the discussion. But if anything, should get more attention, then 10-year as opposed to age, in my view, because the benefit that you get from 10-year rule is that new eyes look at the same problem, challenge some of the past decisions, are not bound to their old decisions, get a fresh set of eyes onto technology, etc. We have that for both the executive board and the board of directors. And implicitly, we also do that actually further down. So a business unit head is in Hilti never longer than 10 years in his role. Now that
10 years is long. 10 years is long.
Yeah, okay, but together with the courage of promoting people early into roles, and then a 10-year role, that creates then the next problem where, good guys that have worked 25 years for you are 54, and you basically want them out of the role. That's also not something that you want to have. And so it's actually a fairly complicated topic, but still, I'm a big believer in 10-year rules. Some of the other topics that you have, reverse mentoring and consulting the youth, etc., I mean, that is nice, and you should do that in any case. I mean, it's a no-regret move. A senior leader should always consult the young and, walk the talk and go through the organization. If you really want to push young people into leadership team, the only way to doing that is to do it a hard way, which means not one tick or, call a headhunter and say, I need 2 young women, for this or that and get them in. But you have to develop them in order to set them up for success. And setting them up for success means you need to make sure that when you have young people and have the courage to get young people into roles, they need to have relevant experience in order to get enough weight to survive in these leadership teams. If you are you said earlier on, when large boards sometimes have topic experts for cyber or for digital or so. My experience with that is horrible. Mm-hmm. This is a feel-good mechanism, tick the box, you can write in your annual report, look, we have this and that diversity. Does that make the company better? Does that make a leadership team better? Not at all. So honestly, it's painful, it's a multi-year thing, it requires a lot of effort. I really see the only way to getting something out of this age diversity, which I'm a big believer in, is to first work for many years to build up strong young leaders.
So just a heads up for the audience, we're going to open for questions in a minute, so if you can think about the questions you want to ask to our panelists. But let me come to you, Clara, on rule setting or principle setting. I mean, sometimes principles are good and sometimes rules are good. They can force change, but they can be a little clumsy. And you sit on the standards body for Germany in this respect. So is there a role for rules and principles here in terms of doing the right thing, not in a superficial way, but in a substantive way in terms of increasing youth in leadership?
Yes, and building on Christoph's point, I also believe in tenure, and the code stipulates tenure as one important indicator for independence. As you know, you don't have to be independent, and I do think that independence ought to be judged, which is an important concept in governance, by more than a mechanical way, because it's really more a mindset. But I think tenure is an important indicator. To your point, looking at the same issue from a different angle with new pair of eyes, I think is a good principle. And therefore, I do that part I subscribe to. I would also say that it's a small contribution, but in taking with your idea of the setting up for success and managing the pipeline purposefully, I think boards, also final responsible board and non-executives, need to get exposure to these people before they are just one below. I think we need to meet them earlier to be able to, when we take key personnel decisions, to have an largely unbiased or at least partially unbiased view, and don't resort to the, let me call the headhunter, find the one. So I think it is an important measure. As a standard setter on that particular angle, I'm more open to it. I don't think that standard setting, that's a more fundamental belief. Mechanical standards in most cases are not very sensible for the complexities that organizations have. And we do have the law, and the law provides the hard boundaries. So inside that hard boundaries, I think we're better served to work with principles and give good examples and show companies how to do better and achieve their objectives.
So it'd be more like how to measure something with the idea of tenure limits than an actual tenure limit, for example.
For example, but on tenure, we do have an indication, also because most investors nowadays are very specific on that. So that's not unusual, and I think it's a very healthy mechanism for really renewal, which as such is good. Mm. Yeah.
Now, Felipe, same question to you. Do we need different structural mechanisms to accelerate this whole process in corporations in the UN? And if so, what would be some of those mechanisms?
For me, it's a complete yes, highlighted, and and I will try. Of course, we were speaking, and my colleagues were speaking about stakeholders, shareholders in this discussion, no, because it's private. And when it's about the UN, no, it's not necessarily something concretely related to voters and people, but it's in somehow yes, because the UN is an intergovernmental body. So when we think about it, it's not smart that an institution that needs to represent the whole population, which is completely underrepresented in the leadership. 50% of the population worldwide. I know we are maybe here in a region with an aging population, but in general, 50% of the global population is under 30 years old. And when we can get some data about leadership, like in the public sector, and the most data we have is about parliamentarians, we see that only 3% of parliamentarians around the whole world are under 30. So that's a big issue, because that's not representing a lot of people. And that is a big problem when it's about building trust. And when I think about the UN, the whole UN is based in trust. If people don't trust in the UN, I made this point before, but we cannot do anything what we do. So yes, I believe we need to include this kind of quotas also in the discussion. Right. And sometimes it's a bit seen on the negative side, but now in a lot of spaces, we still have that quotas on the other way around. For example, when it's about my role, and when I'm in the process also of ending to finish and to bring all the team on board, for some positions, because of the regulations in the bureaucracy, you need to have 15 years of experience in the organization. That doesn't make any sense. Why? We need to take into account the best, but is the best only someone that has 15 years in the organization, for example, to lead the portfolio we are leading? Or is the best someone with 15 years in the organization to lead the discussions around AI and the governance of AI? That are the kinds of things we need to change.
Thank you. So let's hear from the audience. Hopefully that's stimulated some questions. Do we have a microphone? Will the organizers wander around with a microphone? Yeah. Okay. So this lady just here, and I think it's interesting to hear from which perspective you're addressing your question. So maybe say I'm a student, or I'm a board member, or whatever you are, and your question.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a master's student here at the University of St. Gallen, coming from the US. I've visited Hilti, a really wonderful company. My question is really directed to you. Can you give some more concrete examples of ways that you're not just ticking the diversity boxes, but actually really cultivating leadership environments and leadership frameworks that create real value in the company? Because I feel like when we have conversations like this, it can feel like, maybe to me as a student, probably to many practitioners, it's like, yeah, we've heard this, we have to do these things. But I really liked what you said. It's like one thing to have it in your report, but it's another thing to do it and then see the meaning. So maybe you could share some examples of when you've actually seen the aspects or the programs that you've done really create value. And maybe others can come up with answers as well, but I thought your comment was really insightful. So
thank you very much. It's on in every corner. It starts from the recruiting, being clear what you actually want. It goes to staffing projects with a perspective of diversity, that you deliberately decide, who do you put together. And that's not only age, it's also gender and ethnicity, etc. There's a lot of thought going into staffing leadership teams. We work with pools where then there's good next technical heads of a business unit possible, but then you are not deciding on the best technical head for the business unit. You look at who is in the team already, and what kind of diversity would be making that team better. It's around mentoring, because diversity needs a lot of work to make it productive. So we work with mentors in particular for the minority, so that if we take a risk on a person into big roles early, and that's what we're doing, we always assign a mentor that sits with that person in the boat, and also hopefully make sure that there is a culture of accepting also the one or the other mistake that sometimes in the larger organization needs a bit of grandfathering because the immediate environment, needs to bring results, etc. And they're not so willing to accept mistakes. So you need a little bit of weight, power in the company that supports that. It's some of that. So it really, if you need to believe in it, and then it needs to be a red thread throughout the entire handling of development of people, of staffing, etc. It's not 1, 2, 3 things. It's also not something where a board can say, "Hey, HR head, do that. We want to be more diverse and get us a few younger ones in." That would not cut it.
No, because I would say no, it's your job. And what
you would say it's our job, and rightfully so.
And we support. And what we do, we have a cockpit. I have a wonderful KPI dashboard, right? I can tell you where we are when it comes to diversity in all the teams worldwide. I know where the red or the hotspots are, and then we challenge the business, right? It's not my decision. It will always be your decision, and that's why it's also a mindset shift we need to really and to discuss it openly. And maybe let me share one story. I was on a panel I was in the audience, by the way. Panel, 2 female, 2 leaders. Discussion. The moderator asked all of them, and then the moderator only asked the 2 senior leaders. The 2 female leaders were somehow out of discussion. And then I was shocked. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute, I have a question." And I then shared my observation. And I said, what's happening right now? And this is what we need to learn, because sometimes people are not aware of how they act or react, even male, even myself. So what we need to do is, when you see something, speak up. And that was a wonderful moment. I think with that you can change the whole mindset and culture of an organization, because I think diversity is here. It's not, yes, I use now data to convince, to challenge, but diversity is here. You need to understand it, the benefit of it. You said it, right? And so that's why.
Thank you, Alex. Let's get a few more questions in. Maybe this lady just here. Microphone just here.
Hello. My name is Mawish Khan. I work for IMD Business School, the other business school in Lausanne. I've been working in the field of corporate governance for the last 20 years. I used to work for IFC, World Bank, set up institutes of directors, etc. You asked me the perspective, it hurts. 5 years ago, it used to be the youth perspective. I guess as soon as you cross 40, it's the other one. And the complexity of this conversation was when I heard the youth perspective, I was like, yes, we need more people, young people on the board. I hear Clara saying pattern recognition. I'm like, absolutely. My question is the role of the board itself shifting? And the reason I ask is, I'm doing a lot of research of board's role on sustainability. Sustainability is a topic which changes very quickly. The environment is changing quickly. A lot of companies say they take the ecosystem approach. And therefore, the kind of board members they need to have at the top are those who are very quick at connecting CEOs or the C-suite to everything that's happening, outside of their industry or outside of the function. And in that space, if you could just shed a little bit of light as companies try to transform, what's now the role of the board vis-a-vis supporting the CEO and the C-suite in tackling some of these ecosystem kind of changes? And
that's a question for Clara, was it?
Or Christoph?
The panel. Maybe Clara has something to say about this. Clara?
I'm not sure I entirely understood. I think what you're saying is, how can the board best support the C-suite, the CEO, in tackling those issues that as relates to the relevant ecosystem for the company? Is that what yeah, okay.
That's correct. Given that it's not the same ecosystem and not the way the boards used to operate 5-10 years ago, simply because it's moving very fast. So you need youth.
Yeah, I think depending on the governance system in which you operate, that is the role, at the core of the role of the board or not. In many of the European systems, you have a version of, this is the non-executive part of the board has at the core a supervising function, and in that of course, has to be able to challenge what I would call strategy. And this is for me, most of the questions you're alluding are at the core of strategy. And what you're saying is right. That strategy, when I studied here, used to be something that was closer to we do something and then it stands there for 4 years and then we look at it again and strategy nowadays has a lot more to do with a few core principles and then an agility around that. And that, I think, as it concerns that way, I think, yes, boards, even in relatively delegated systems, have to be in the position to challenge the C-suite on these questions which are a lot more moving than they used to be. And how do you do that? I believe the way you do that is, as a board, you have an ever-increasing obligation to understand what the company is actually doing, to understand the immediate environment as regards competitors, regulator, other stakeholders, impact on social, ecological, and other matters. And that has to do with understanding the company, that has to do with spending time, that has to do with getting external input, which nowadays for boards is increasingly, thank God, common, but also part of what we do. So we seek out conversations and interactions with customers, with analysts for the shareholders, with regulators, with NGOs where relevant, with the public sector on as they are safeguarding some of the interests that we're talking about. So I think the only answer I can think of is, first, of course, you have the board composition, but then the board composition doesn't solve it because the thing is ever evolving, and therefore it has a lot to do of feeding the board with relevant information, both from inside the company, but also from the external world. And that's, I think, good practice.
Thank you. And more questions? Yes, just here.
There was a gentleman in the back who was a bit, yeah.
Thank you so much. Fabio, I'm volunteering here. I'm also studying here at HSG. And I'll try to make a point as shortly as possible. I'm a bit bothered about the fact that we are only discussing why it can't be possible to bring young people. You're talking about development programs, 15 years. In 15 years, I'm 45. When do you want to start? At 0, at kindergarten age? I feel like we have so much to prove to you to get a seat at the table that it's actually not really possible to get there. Like, what do you expect us? I mean, you see these young, brilliant people. Look at the St. Gallen Symposium. Amazing job done there. And still, we are discussing we need the experience, and we need this, we need that, we need 15 years in the company. Like, how can you not get biased by spending 15 years in a company? And lastly, I would like to invite to the perspective that maybe the only experience we need is our perspective, the different perspective we bring in, and not understanding what to do when a CEO leaves the company and goes directly to the competition. Maybe it's about, sorry, I'm nervous. I know. Maybe it's just about being young, willing to change something. And it's not about, I don't know, having all the experience you ask us to have, because I won't get there in the time you want us. I won't get 20 years of experience by the age of 20. But maybe I have already 20 years of experience by being 20. It's just a different perspective.
Thank you for the comment. Who wants to take that? Felipe.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Can I?
That's one for you.
Thank you for bringing this final intervention about like that you have 20 years of experience in your own life, in a different world, and from a different place. And that's I will try to insist again on this paternalist approach of young people and how we switch, thinking about the young people as partners and not only as beneficiaries, in all what we are, I think that one thing that we also need to be conscious is that the essence of power is not to be given. So this transformation implies breaking the status quo. And it implies that there are some CEOs or some board members that are going to leave their place with a lot of beneficiaries for being there. So I think that if we agree that this is a smart decision for different explanations, and we have been discussing a lot of different perspectives, then it's what the mechanism for transformation. So yes, I believe that quotas are a kind of concrete mechanism for making that to happen. They are perfect? No, of course, they are not perfect. It's only about putting someone because of its age? No, quotas doesn't mean only putting someone because of its age. It's, of course, putting the best one to be at that position. But I can use the example of the UN. If the UN hasn't switched some years ago some positive quotas for its leadership, we will still have a continuous male leadership in the organization. But now we have 50% of women and 50% of men at leadership position in the organization. That's not happening with young people. I mentioned I'm the only one under 35 at this level in the organization. At the same time, we're still far from that, but the transformation is coming. In 8 years in the UN, we have only secretary generals that are male. I hope that that's something that is going to change. But it's changing, and I think that this kind of positive mechanisms are a concrete way of transforming it.
Christoph?
Philly, I think it's very courageous, the question that you ask, and very welcome, even though I have a different opinion and I want to argue for it. But thank you for doing that. First of all, Felipe, I believe we have to say the UN or the EU Parliament is a different entity than a big bank or a large corporation where you have to take big decisions and lead thousands of people and coach people. And you lead people that already have 20 years of experience, and they ask yourself, why is now Felipe my boss and I was not selected? The reality is most organizations don't provide power to a person in leadership roles because of the position or someone puts you in place. You have to earn that every year, every day. And that's at least the culture that we also have. A leader dies in Hilti if he or she would not prove every day why he or she was selected. And for that to happen and to create followership and to create acceptance also for the tough decisions that a leader has to take, you unfortunately need to have some relevant experience. You need to understand the business. You need to also have some pattern recognition of bad things that happened. And therefore, as much as I support young people early, I have to say there is no way around setting them up for success first. And that requires to put them step by step into bigger and bigger and bigger roles. Now you're 20. If you end up in a senior leadership role at the age of 40, you're still very young, and then actually you play actually that young in role, but you cannot accelerate that without limits. That's unfortunately true. I've seen many young people put into roles that simply died because they were not able to create that followership.
So, well, unfortunately, they didn't give me a term limit, but they did give me a time limit. So I need to abide by my governance principles.
But I would say, like in the Parliament, for a personal reference, can I
very quickly?
Very quickly. So I have most of my staff. It's much more older than me, much more experience in the organization. So it doesn't mean that because I jump into, I have their support and the leadership. I need to build that. But when you have a process, a competitive process and competency-based interviews process to choose the people at that position, you will put the right person there. And it's not about only the age.
Clear. And you were apparently selected well because you are that special person, so I'm all for it.
No, I'm not sure. Maybe in 2 years.
I assume that that's the case. But I just say, quality beats diversity. When you have a very strong young person, perfect. But
okay.
The strength needs to be there.
So let's wrap it up. I mean, I think we haven't come to a definitive conclusion, but I think we've covered the different aspects of this debate, the desirability of addressing this balance of age and experience and curiosity in leadership, and the challenges in doing so, and maybe some specific ways of doing so. Let me end by emphasizing something that may please the last questioner. So actually, the St. Gallen Forum is taking a very activist role on this proposition. It's not just studying the idea of youth in leadership. They actually employ this gentleman sitting here, I understand, to specifically hire for actual board roles younger leaders that have credibility or track record or expertise in the different areas. That's called the Young Leaders on Board program. And if you want to know more about that, and I believe it's aimed at young leaders under the age of 40, then you can speak to this gentleman. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. You can speak to him or Felix Rudiger, or Flavia Conti-Rossini, who will be who'll probably come to the front. You can talk to them more here. So let me end by thanking the panel for a really a passionate and informative discussion. Alex, Christoph, Clara, Felipe, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.